Welcome to News Beacon, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Let's talk about something you rely on every day but rarely consider: potash. It's a mineral, rich in potassium, and it's essential for plant health and crop yields. Without potash, plants are weaker, smaller, and produce less food. It's the backbone of modern agriculture, quietly powering every harvest. American farmers depend on it to keep their fields productive year after year. But here's the catch: the US doesn't have much potash of its own. Over 80% is imported, mostly from Canada. This cross-border trade has kept American farms thriving and Canadian mines busy. But what happens when that relationship is threatened? That's where things get interesting. Someone decided to start a trade fight with our potash supplier, and the consequences are bigger than you think. Enter President Trump's 2025 trade strategy, a bold, headline-grabbing move that would send shockwaves through North American agriculture. The administration slapped a 10% tariff on Canadian potash, a critical mineral used in fertilizer, instantly raising the stakes for both countries. Officially, the move was meant to pressure Canada on unrelated political issues, but it quickly became clear that the consequences would reach far beyond diplomatic circles. For American farmers, this meant a sudden spike in fertilizer costs, right before planting season, when every dollar counts and timing is everything. The price hike rippled through the supply chain, squeezing already thin profit margins and forcing tough decisions on farms big and small. The hope in Washington was that US producers could quickly ramp up and fill the gap left by Canadian imports. But that was never realistic. America's potash industry simply couldn't scale up overnight. Farmers faced a tough choice: pay more and watch profits evaporate, or cut back on fertilizer and risk their entire harvest. Using less potash meant weaker crops, smaller yields, and a growing sense of uncertainty about the season ahead. The policy was a gamble, one that put America's food supply and the livelihoods of countless rural families directly on the line. Instead of hurting Canada, the tariff hit US agriculture hardest, leaving Canadian producers searching for new markets but largely unscathed. The tariff wasn't just a political move, it was a direct blow to the heartland, where every harvest is a gamble and every policy decision can tip the scales. Farmers were left scrambling to adapt, meeting in town halls and fields to share worries and search for solutions. The fallout was immediate, and the uncertainty was palpable. The gamble had begun, and American agriculture was on the front lines, facing risks that would shape the future of farming for years to come. The impact of the potash tariff was swift, sending shockwaves through the agricultural heartland almost overnight. For American farmers, the consequences were not just immediate, they were deeply personal and, for many, devastating. Fertilizer costs soared to record highs, making it nearly impossible for small and mid-sized family farms to keep up with expenses. The price of a single bag of potash doubled, and in some regions even tripled, putting immense pressure on already thin profit margins. Many farmers had no choice but to cut back on potash, hoping their crops could survive with less. But the results were clear: lower crop yields, stunted growth, and a sharp decline in income that threatened the very survival of their farms. Fields that once produced 200 bushels of corn per acre dropped to 170 or less, erasing years of hard work and careful planning. The difference was visible from the road: patchy, uneven fields where healthy crops once stood tall. The ripple effect was devastating. Lost revenue meant mounting debt, and for some, the heartbreak of watching generations-old farms close their doors for good. Equipment sat idle, barns emptied, and the sense of loss was palpable in rural communities. The US potash industry, small and underdeveloped, simply couldn't fill the gap. Domestic production was a drop in the bucket compared to what was needed, leaving farmers with no good options and nowhere to turn for relief. As farms struggled, the pain spread outward. Equipment dealers, seed suppliers, and local businesses that depended on a thriving farm economy all felt the pinch. Rural towns saw fewer customers, empty storefronts, and a growing sense of uncertainty about the future. Hopes that tariffs would spark a revival in American manufacturing faded quickly. Instead of new jobs and bustling factories, many communities saw only shuttered plants and lost opportunities. The policy, meant to protect American interests, ended up hollowing out rural communities and putting the nation's food security at risk. Main streets grew quieter, and the fabric of small-town life began to unravel. The fallout from the potash gamble was real, and it was landing hard in the heartland. Storm clouds gathered, both literally and figuratively, as uncertainty loomed over the future of American agriculture. The crisis exposed just how fragile the agricultural system could be. With fewer workers in the fields and empty silos on the horizon, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. For many, the damage was irreversible. Once productive land was left to grow wild, and the legacy of family farming was at risk of disappearing forever. The cost of fertilizer became the cost of survival. Every dollar spent was a gamble, and for some the odds were simply too steep to overcome. And the consequences stretched far beyond the farm gate, touching every corner of rural America, and reminding us all how interconnected our food system truly is. North of the border, the story was very different. While the US was grappling with the fallout of its new trade policy, Canada was quietly preparing for a windfall. The two countries, so closely linked by geography and trade, suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of a growing economic divide. Canada, with its vast potash reserves buried deep beneath the prairies, suddenly found itself in a position of strength. Saskatchewan, already known as the world's potash capital, became the epicenter of a global supply shift. The world's attention turned north, as buyers scrambled to secure reliable sources of this essential fertilizer. US farmers, caught in the crossfire, had no choice but to pay the tariff, boosting Canadian companies' profits. The demand for potash didn't disappear, it just became more expensive for Americans, and more lucrative for their northern neighbors. The extra cost didn't help American farmers, it just fattened Canadian corporate margins. For Canadian producers, it was a golden opportunity to expand operations, invest in new technology, and hire more workers. The policy meant to pressure Canada ended up enriching it instead. Shipments of potash surged out of Canadian ports, destined for markets around the world, as global buyers sought stability and reliability. Mining towns in Saskatchewan thrived, investments soared, and jobs were secure. Local economies flourished as new businesses opened to support the growing workforce, and families felt a renewed sense of optimism. The irony? The US was paying a premium to its neighbor for a resource it couldn't live without. Every truckload of potash crossing the border was a reminder of how interconnected and interdependent the two economies truly were. Major players like BHP doubled down on Canadian potash, betting on long-term global demand. New mines broke ground, and expansion projects promised decades of prosperity for the region. Political squabbles in the US were just background noise to a booming Canadian industry. In Ottawa, leaders celebrated the unexpected surge in revenue, while industry executives looked to the future with confidence. The tariff backfired, making Canada stronger and more confident in its role as a global supplier. The country's reputation as a stable, reliable source of potash was cemented on the world stage. America's self-inflicted wound became Canada's windfall. The benefits rippled through communities, from the mines to the ports, and all the way to the national economy. The lesson? In a global market, trade wars rarely go as planned. Unintended consequences can reshape entire industries, and the winners aren't always who you expect. Sometimes your rival ends up with the winning hand, and in this case, Canada played its cards perfectly. Canada didn't take the tariffs lying down. The issue exploded during a federal election, forcing Prime Minister Mark Carney to promise a strong response. The crisis united Canadians across the political spectrum, turning trade policy into a national rallying cry. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre demanded tough retaliation and early trade renegotiations. Provincial leaders threatened to cut off key U.S. exports, escalating tensions. The business community warned of real economic pain on both sides of the border. Canada was no longer willing to be a passive partner in trade. The potash tariff galvanized a new sense of economic sovereignty. The friendly neighbor was ready to fight back, setting the stage for a more contentious relationship. The era of quiet cooperation was over. The stakes had never been higher for both nations. In Washington, the potash tariff sparked a fierce political battle. Lawmakers from farm states pushed back, hearing directly from struggling constituents. The Senate narrowly passed a measure to block the tariffs, with bipartisan support. But the House, loyal to the president, refused to act, leaving the bill dead on arrival. The divide was clear. The Senate wanted relief for farmers. The House protected the administration's agenda. Farmers were left in limbo, with no certainty about future costs. The government was at war with itself, while the agricultural sector suffered. Political gridlock meant no quick fix. The real losers were the people who put food on America's tables. This isn't the first time a nation has gambled with potash. A century ago, Germany's monopoly on potash during World War I crippled its enemies' food supplies. The lesson was clear: relying on a single supplier is a dangerous vulnerability. Britain learned and secured its own sources, avoiding disaster in World War II. National security depends on reliable access to critical resources. The 2025 potash tariff ignored this hard-won wisdom. By targeting Canada, the US risked repeating history's mistakes. Short-term politics trumped long-term strategy. The result? A self-inflicted wound to food security. Sometimes the past has all the answers we need, if we're willing to listen. If Canada's potash becomes too costly, where else can the US turn? The alternatives are troubling: Russia, Belarus, and China. Relying on these countries would mean empowering adversaries and risking food security. Russia and Belarus are hostile to US interests. China is a strategic competitor. Depending on them for fertilizer would be a colossal blunder. The potash tariff forced America to consider dangerous options. Every alternative to Canada comes with massive risks. The policy didn't just hurt farmers, it jeopardized the entire food supply chain. Sometimes the safest partner is the one next door. The wrong move could put America's dinner plate in the hands of its rivals. The potash tariff is more than a trade dispute. It's a warning. It hurt American farmers, divided politicians, and enriched Canada. For Canada, the windfall came with new doubts about its economic ties to the US. The once stable partnership is now on shaky ground. The real lesson: strategic resources and reliable allies matter more than short-term wins. Ignoring history's lessons only creates new vulnerabilities. The future depends on restoring trust and stability between neighbors. Because when the ground shakes, both sides feel the tremors.